two of my guests, two guests this evening are people who contributed to this issue. In the features section, we have an interview with 3 photographers, and we talk about their differing experience of working as a photographer. Trish Morrissey and John Tonks and Heather Ajapong. And it's a fascinating conversation, mostly about their working lives and how photography has changed over the last 30 years. But coincidentally, or maybe not, maybe through a brilliant piece of programming, Trish Morrissey also has a retrospective currently on, the beautiful catalogue of which will be launched on the 21st of September in London. I guess I get an approving nod there. So, so you'll have the chance to see that for yourself. But this is a great opportunity for us to talk to Trish about her work. And we thought we'd talk a little bit about the experience of doing this retrospective, because it is a kind of coincidentally a nice view at the same subject. And in the portfolio section, there's a lot of wonderful work. Tom Marillian's work is particularly good. I recommend you have a look at that. It was a very interesting experience putting it into the magazine. And also Julian Germain's work. And I'll be talking to Julian after I've spoken to Trish. And we should thank Grain for their help in working with Julian and putting this together. And they were the supporters of the work that Julian has done in Birmingham. But first of all, let's talk to Trish. Trish, I have here an artifact from the past that I dug out, which is issue 22 of Source. Trish must be one of the photographers who's featured most often in the portfolio page of the magazine. And this was the first time I think you appeared in the magazine with this striking cover of your dramatic work, is that the right word? Women with Moustaches. This covers the span of your retrospective as well. So could you tell us a little bit about the experience of putting together this, would you call it a mini retrospective?
I prefer to call it a mid-career survey show, because I hope I've got another another 20 years or so to go before I have a full, retrospective. So yeah, I call it. I'm more comfortable with a survey show. So yeah, so it covers 2001 to 2022. So it's slightly over 20 years. So the subtitle is 20 Years of Photography and Film. The picture you just showed from Women with Moustaches, or WWM as it became known, yeah, that didn't make it into the 20 years because that was a bit earlier. And also it's I know we talked about this the other day, and I said I almost see it as my juvenilia because it's so different, even though I was quite old when I made it, about in my late 20s, early 30s. But it was a way of working that was much more rooted in my experience of photography at the time, which was editorial photography. So it looks very much like an editorial feature, really. And it kind of, I mean, it obviously meant a lot to me at the time, and it was all about, gender stereotypes and signifiers and all of that. But it was very much in the style of a editorial piece, which it was, and it did get published in several different places. But then I did an MA straight after in sort of 2000, 2001, and that sort of really refocused my way of thinking and working with photography. I mean, I just devoured sort of critical theory, which I'd never really been exposed to before because I didn't do an undergraduate. I didn't do a first degree. So, I did a complete reboot of how I worked and what I was doing. So it's almost like I see that as being pre Trish Morrissey, even though it did get a lot of publicity and whatever, and was, in various places, but it's not, it feels like somebody else did that.
That's fascinating. I mean, do you think of yourself as a different person pre 2001?
Yeah, I think the so I was working as a commercial photographer. I started, as an assistant. I was first of all in a darkroom in Ireland in a newspaper, and then I was an assistant to commercial photographers, and then I sort of dabbled in commercial photography for about 4 or 5 years, including editorial and advertising in the sort of late 90s. And it just never felt like the box that I should be in. It just was very, very frustrating, and I just. Yeah, I didn't enjoy it, and I don't think I was very good at it. And once I did the MA, I kind of removed, I slowly withdrew from it. I stopped looking for the work, and the work dried up. And I think it was kind of coincident, I just wasn't. It wasn't my play. It wasn't I was a square peg in a round hole, I think. And once I was fortunate enough that I have had, commissions and bursaries and whatever sales to sort of live very frugally on what I earn, which I'm just very fortunate. But I was earning a lot of money in the 1990s. If I only had that money now, I had all of it with the commercial work. But yeah, I'm much happier just doing what I do now. Yeah.
What has it been like looking back over the span of the work that's gone into the show?
Really enjoyable and cathartic. I mean, a lot of the work is still it didn't feel like this. The first series that's in it is 7 years, which was the pictures that I that sort of first broke through a little bit. I had my first show at Impressions Gallery with that work. They were super supportive, still are. And that was my first proper gallery, solo show. So yeah, they're like old friends. I think there's a sort of progress through the work that sort of ties in with my own concerns and my biography, my life experience. So they're very much tied up. So it's like looking at an old box of photos under your bed. They still, yeah, I'm very warm to them.
If we have a look at this is the first slide that we have from your work. So this is the piece of work front that you made after 7 years. Could you describe what's going on in this picture for people who don't know it?
Yeah, so when I was doing 7 years, which is the kind of a fake family album where my sister and I played all the parts, I became particularly interested in the sort of family snap that is very, the particular one, which is the beach family snap. And started to observe how people behave on beaches and how, you become a voyeur and a sort of a show off at the same time. We bring the British and Irish beach experience is very much the idea of bringing the domestic outdoors. So it becomes like an extension of your home. And I came really interested in the idea of the family as a sort of, as a unit, which, has invisible boundaries. So the sort of, the blanket or whatever that you're sitting on becomes your home. And so why it's called front is because I was kind of like the front of, because so basically, so in these photographs, I approached what the mechanics of it rather than the sort of the theory behind it is that I would approach families on beaches and ask if I could join their family while a female member of the group came out and took the photograph. So on a 5.4 camera, which I'd set up previously. And the sort of the exchange was that I would do a beautiful portrait of them on the beach, give them a 10-12 picture, several of them if there's a large group, as there was in this one. So I took the place of Chloe Gwynn, who came and clicked the shutter. So we only had, because I had no money and this was done on a shoestring, I had 3 sheets of 4x5 for each picture. So one was of the group as they were, and then one was of me with the group. And then the third one was just a second of me with the group as insurance. And it was, really, really tight. So so this is just a lovely family and friends group on the beach. And the other thing that was very important to the sort of swapping of roles was that I had a talisman of some sort from the woman whose place I took. So it could have been her sunglasses, a hat, a piece of jewelry. In this case, it was a beer bottle I took from her, so that there was some sort of visceral or physical connection to her. So that's what this is about. Sort of the beach being that sort of space, a sort of no man's land between, the land which is culture and society and formal behaviors, and then the C, which is nature and chaos. And then, you know, normal behaviors are kind of suspended in this space. So that's what this series is.
And was this about you discovering something about who you were?
Well, yeah, this is probably the first time. I mean, the family album pictures, even though they're kind of based, not all, they're more like the 7 years pictures are more about the generic times when people take family snaps, and they were also like about the darker side of the family snap, the snap that, you know, shows the underbelly, or if, you know, if you look 10 years later, you can see that, oh yeah, that's why Jimmy never stood next to Joey, because now we know, blah blah blah. And I've forgotten your question, but I know I was leading.
I was asking if you were finding out something about yourself in doing.
Oh yeah. So that was kind of based, started slightly biographical, but yeah. So this, I realized looking back now that I was kind of trying on motherhood, because actually in this particular picture, I didn't know it, but I was pregnant with my first child. And then so the whole series spanned 2 years, well, 3 summers actually. So I was sort of very slightly pregnant for a summer that we didn't really show it, and then had the baby, and then the following summer in the winter, and then the following summer I was still quite chunky and breastfeeding, so I was like a much different figure. I sort of, and then the following year again I was back sort of slimmer, so it's kind of like I sort of lost and gained 3 stone in that sort of period. So I think that really helped the work, because I kind of was drawn to families where I could fit in with my physicality. So I kind of, you know, if you know what I mean, that kind of meant that I blended and was kind of, you know, looked like I was part of the family group, which I don't think I would have happened if I hadn't had that. I would have just been photographing the same type of people the whole time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's something paradoxical about you sort of finding out something about who you are by assuming the identity of somebody else.
Well, I think a lot of that is I've carried on kind of doing that, and it's only in retrospect that I realized I'm doing that. Like a residency I had at Hestercombe House in 2017, where I worked with biographies of 2 of the women who lived there. I realized I was trying on sort of middle age. I wasn't quite, well, I wouldn't consider myself quite middle-aged yet then. I am now, but I didn't feel like I was quite then. And old age, because I was playing a woman in her sort of 50s and then a woman in her 70s. So I kind of, you know, was playing with latex and wrinkles and grey hair wigs, and you know, I was really playing with the physicality of being older. It's almost like a sort of a rehearsal. I think, yeah, looking back, I find a lot of it feels like a rehearsal for my life as it unfolds.
The pictures are all lovely, and the people are always having a nice time, but there is also something deeply sinister about you acting like a sort of a cuckoo.
Well, 100%. I mean, yes, because I've stayed quite in contact with a lot of the families, and one of the women said it's as if I've died, and you know, I no longer exist. But I mean, in the beginning when I started approaching families, before I kind of worked out the psychology of who would be willing to be part of this crazy idea, I sort of, people who were playing or sitting up chatting and looking around and being interested in the world, they were the people to ask. People who were sleeping or eating, definitely not. And then I also realized that I had to already look like I was part of the group before I could ask them. So I would scope the beach. I sort of set up a sort of encampment with my sort of little tent and a backpack full of clothes, and then I would sort of like walk up and down the beach and see incognito with sunglasses on, a big hat, so nobody noticed me. And then I would see the family that I thought I could work with, or I know that I could approach, and then I would change into clothing that kind of looked a little bit like what they were already wearing, and then I would ask them, because I realized very early on that if I didn't already look like I was part of the group, I wouldn't be accepted. So it's quite interesting from a psychological point of view. And also it was really important to sort of work out who the alpha was within the group and to address my questions to them, because I worked out quite quickly that when you don't do that, then the alpha gets grumpy and says no, even though you're not actually speaking to them. So yeah, so from a psychological point of view, it was very you know, psychosocial behavior. It was very interesting as well.
So this is you in a quite different guise. So this piece of work, which was also in Source, 10 figures in a suitcase, is that correct?
10 people in a suitcase,
10
yeah.
people in a suitcase. Is work you did in Finland based on work in an archive?
Yeah, so this was a commission, a residency, which was so scary, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. I had spent sort of 2 years before this opportunity came along looking after my son and not really working, because I had a child. My second child was born with a lot of health issues. And suddenly this incredible opportunity to go to Finland, work as, you know, make work in this little town, which had the most incredible museum attached to it. So incongruous, this little sort of old industrial town, quite sort of brutal build archaeology, and then this like mini Tate in the woods. What scared me was that, like, a lot of times you do a residency and there's, you know, you might have an exhibition at the end, but sometimes it's wonderful. They just want you to make work and maybe donate a little something at the end, which is fab. But this was like a show. I mean, it was going to be a group show, so it wasn't all me, thank God, but it was going to be a show in this like enormous, like Tate, effectively, a pavilion of just huge. And the pressure, having not made anything really for 2 years, and then to sort of have to perform in a very short period of time, because the residency was just 2 weeks. Yeah, I tried to cancel it many times, and I kept being persuaded to think again and not actually cancel it. And then one of the curators just said, "Oh, did you know that the museum has an archive of, you know, thousands and thousands of photographs?" Perhaps because they kind of wanted me to repeat front, but I don't like to repeat myself. And the town didn't really lend itself to that because it's quite sparsely populated. Anyway, you know, it just didn't seem right. So, going through this archive online, I mean, there's, I don't know, 30,000-40,000 pictures, and you know, they ranged from so it's a sort of one of these towns that is like grew up around a business or a factory, a bit like Bourneville or Clark's or any of the, you know, the sort of like towns that started with the industry. And it was, you know, the classic patriarchal industry where the social scene, everything was done through the business, which was the Sterlecu's paper mill. So yeah, so these pictures went from, you know, photographs of the founder of the factory from the mid 1800s right the way through up to contemporary, you know, taken last year, of just local people stuff. So there was there was, you know, social pictures, industrial pictures, newspaper pictures, just an all in a hodgepodge, you know, very difficult to sort of see the wood for the trees. But anyway, so I quickly got through them, and I was the pictures that spoke to me, like where I felt a visceral connection with the character or the protagonist in the picture. I narrowed it down to about 15-20 pictures, and eventually 10 for the exhibition, where I recreated these original photographs. And sometimes, like, for example, for this one, I actually changed the decade from the 80s to the 50s, because I felt that the woman who's in the photograph was from a different era, even, you know, so. And so there was always something about the characters within the photographs, like the way they had stood, or the angle of the head, or just something. I you know, it's probably the classic Roland Barthes punctum, you know, it's like that sort of something hit me, and I couldn't stop looking at these photographs. So then I sort of recreated them.
So there's obviously a lot about the specificity of that place and that archive, but in our conversation when we were looking at this work again recently, the thing that struck me about them was that you had to go from the experience of working about your own experience, making work about your own experience, to being completely transplanted to something else. That must have been a giant leap for you to go to a different country, to a different culture, and still be able to make work.
Well, this was the only way I could do it, because there wasn't just me doing this. There was a group show. So there was about 10 other artists, photographers, filmmakers invited, international. Some, I mean, probably half of them were Finnish and the rest were international. And that was why I kept trying to cancel it, because I'm not the kind of person who can just turn up somewhere and make a picture. I mean, that's just not what I do. The actual photograph or film, more recently I'm making more films than photographs, are like the final little moment in a massively long process. You know, even the 7 years pictures were the final moment of a massively long process of, you know, working out the clothes, the pose, the facial expression. And it's not even just an expression, it's a whole physicality. I mean, you know, looking back or looking now at it, of course, it's just what an actor does, but I'm coming at it from a completely different angle. I am not theatrically trained, although I have done a little bit of Laban to make the films that I did for that residency at Hesticum, because I was having to hold a character for, you know, for a whole film rather than just for a 2/50th of a second or whatever for a photograph, which is quite a different, you know, procedure. But yeah, so it's performance, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's what actors do for their bread and butter all day, every day. But I mean, I have somebody helping with styling and making things and, you know, cutting wigs and finding clothes and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, I do most of it myself. You know, set a timer on the camera, or I think I have this great thing now called an intervalometer, which just takes a picture every, when you set it, it can take a picture every 2 seconds, every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, every hour. So it's changed my life. And also, sadly, leaving 4x5 behind. This is the first time I worked digitally as well, because again, the circumstances were so tricky. But because I was going somewhere, as you say, somewhere away, there was a tiny budget for materials, and there was no chance of repeating. With 7 years work, I repeated pictures so many times to get them right. With front, I photographed maybe 30 families, but only chose 12 for the final edit. You know, so it's like this had to be much more precise. So I had to shoot digitally. But I think as a nosy person, which is what my main sort of thrust in life is, I'm quite nosy, going through archives and photographs. And, you know, I've worked with archives now several times, since this was the first time working with an archive that was like, you know, not a family archive or something personal, an archive outside of, you know, my own sort of sphere. It just is endlessly fascinating.
So I'd like to look now at some recent work, or sort of an ongoing set of pictures. And we have 4 pictures from this series, and I'll show the 4 pictures in sequence, and then we can talk about them afterwards. So that's the 4 pictures together. Remind me of the title of this series.
Yeah, this is called The Maiden and the Crone. So yeah,
this is your daughter.
This is my daughter, yeah. So as a quite an old, as they called me in the delivery room, a geriatric mother at the ripe old age of 38 3/4 when I gave birth. We were sort of, she was hitting puberty and I was hitting menopause at exactly the same time. So it's a sort of self-effacing idea where, you know, I'm embracing my crone phase with joy and gusto. So it's basically a double portrait. We started in 2017, and we're doing a double portrait once or twice. Well, funnily enough, during 2020, when we had all the time in the world, I only managed to do 1 picture, but trying to do 2 a year, sort of notionally spring and autumn, you know, another sort of reference to the maiden and the crone stage of a woman's life. And
the work we've talked about up to now, you're performing to some extent. Are you performing in these pictures?
no, these are, no, very much not. I mean, you know, so when I had this idea of doing this double portrait that we would just carry on doing, I wanted it to, you know, the work, the Brown Sisters by, you know, Nicholas Nixon's, I mean, when I ever see those photographs, it always brings me to tears, because they're just, I mean, it's life, it's photography, it's exactly what photography is for in a way. It's kind of nostalgic, it's heartbreaking because we all die in the end. You know, it's like seeing the aging process is just beautiful. I'm even welling up thinking about those photographs now, actually. Anyway, so yeah, so I wanted to do, and I mean, I'm not saying I want to do a copy of that, because these pictures are done super on the fly, because my daughter has no patience with my shenanigans at all. So it's done in my living room, where I just move a sofa and a chair out of the way. It takes me 2 minutes. I can move them into another room. I set up a little fill-in flash, and we stand more or less in the same spot. You can see the sort of the corner of the room is between us, so I always make sure that you can kind of see the line between the two of us. We kind of always try and, you know, and I'd always make sure there's a head clearance at least. But sometimes I'm wearing shoes, sometimes I'm not, sometimes she is, sometimes not. So our heights kind of vary a little bit as well. I mean, she's 5'3" and probably won't grow much more, and I'm 5'7" and I'm probably shrinking by now. So in fact, I think I have shrunk about a half an inch. I always say I'm 5'7", but actually I don't think I'm 5'7" anymore. Anyway, so yeah, so they're very much done on the fly. It takes about 10-15 minutes. I mean, you know, I see always lots of other, I'm thinking of a series by Zed Nelson, I can't remember what he calls it, where he's photographed a couple and their baby, and now, you know, for the last 20 or 30 years, and he is so precise about where they stand, the lighting. He must have like a book of measurements. I don't know how he, but I decided that wasn't going to work for Kate, my daughter, and I. So it's very much on the fly. It's very quick. And sometimes, I mean, these I look quite nice in these, I have to say, as being a little bit vain, but the ones I've done recently, we look very haggard. Both of us look, so from 2021, 2022, we're not looking great, but that's fine, because that'll add to the sort of, as time goes on, you know, it'll add to the sort of the spread of emotions and life experience. You know, this sort of, you won't necessarily know what's been going on in our lives from the photographs, but you'll know that it's maybe not been a great day. So I don't always pick a good day to take the pictures, put it that way.
Do you think about this work in relation to the span of your life?
Absolutely. I mean, even like when I'm thinking of the work that I'm interested in making all the time is very much about where I am at in my life. And I you know, I said, I think I made a conscious decision from actually 10 people in a suitcase. I did quite a few photographs where I took on a male persona. But since 2017, working with the two women who lived in this sort of stately home in Somerset, I kind of made a conscious decision to only work with women's lives now, you know, intertwining mine and theirs. It's sort of like, it's an autofic. Well, the exhibition and the book is called Autofictions, which is really what they are. They're kind of a weaving of fact, fiction, fantasy, my life, other people's lives, but very much from a women's perspective now. And I also, because I think in historical terms, you know, women's stories have been traditionally, hopefully corrected now a little bit, but, you know, very much overlooked in favor of men's. I mean, I recently saw, well, not recently, it was obviously the 20th anniversary of the cover of Time magazine of the Good Friday Agreement, you know, commemoration of 20 years, and all the men were there. Mo Molam was not in the picture. I mean, you know, and she was, so it's happening all the time. So yeah, so I'm very much interested in women's stories, overlooked women.
Okay, that's a great place to stop. Thanks very much, Trish. And give us a reminder when the book is now available in good bookshops.
Sadly, not yet in good bookshops. The first opportunity to buy it here, unless you want to spend probably quite a bit of money on transportation from Finland, you can buy it through the website, through the Syracuse Museum website, or the PARVS, PARVS publishers website. But there will be a book launch on the 21st at Photo book cafe in Shoreditch, where there would be a special edition print also. So only 50 prints will be available on the night and we haven't just because and it won't cost much more than the price of the book. So it's like a sort of a little gift rather than a sort of also, pay this loads more money for print. So it's going to be a 10 by 8 as part of the book. So the details haven't been worked out yet, but the 21st of September, 7 till 9, I think, or is it 6 till 9, something like that. Anyway, they have the same times for all their events, but yeah, right. Look out for PR starting the end of the month.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Richard. Thank you.
So we move over to Julian. Julian, if you could unmute yourself. I think it's perfectly, it's sort of like the perfect segue from the work we were just looking at of Trish's to the work we're going to talk about with yours, another generational project.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit about how your generational project started?
It came from a project I did in 1999 called The Face of the Century, which was a series of it was just an idea to mark the end of the century, and it was connected to my personal experience of me and my partner lost our first daughter the year before, and then we had another child on the way, due to be born at the end of 1999. And so it was a different experience. It felt positive after everything that had happened. And I just had this idea to photograph somebody that was born in 1899, and then somebody who was born in 1900, and then somebody who was born in 1901, until I got to having my own child at the end of the year, and then making a portrait of, as it turned out, her when she was newborn. And obviously it was about life and death and everything in between. And yes, and it was, what I always say is that it was a bit like filling up your Panini sticker album when the World Cup comes round. I just the elderly people I mostly photographed in care home, about 3 or 4 care homes I went to. Everybody else pretty much I just stopped in the street and photographed against some quite clear background. So it's very straightforward, very simple. It's just a picture of somebody presenting themselves for the camera. And and it's amazing. It's a very simple device, but it's amazing how when you follow that journey through, the series starts with somebody who's 100 and ends with my daughter. And it's amazing when you start to look through how moving that becomes. I think you start to realize a lot of things. You realize that, in the grand scheme of things, you stop looking young much earlier than you'd think. You realize that old age, if you live to a ripe old age, you realize that a third of the book, people are old, really. So yeah, that was quite a simple idea, and then 2 or 3 years later, I was interested, intrigued in all of the sort of issues that project threw up, and I was interested in developing it further. And then I don't know where exactly it came from, but I was interested in the idea of bringing generations together and photographing them at the same moment. And so I had this idea that I could photograph 4 and 5 generation families. I thought 3 generations would just be too kind of straightforward and not unusual enough. There was something about 4 and 5 generation families that I thought would somehow be more compelling. I've never really tested that, to be honest with you. But anyway, I always like to put stumbling blocks in the way, I suppose, of my projects. And one of the challenges is just finding the families, and then finding a family that can actually get together at the same time and place to be photographed. And
So I've put on screen. Is this this is the second picture you took? I think you said
this was the second generation's portrait I ever made. It would have been sometime in late 2004, and yeah, at that point I was the fellow in. There used to be a thing called the Fellow in Photography at the National Museum of Photography, when there used to be a National Museum of Photography in Bradford, and yeah, and they were good at contacting local newspapers and sort of like doing a call out for families, and this is one of the first families that responded. And yes, and I didn't really have a plan. I'd made one portrait beforehand, and it hadn't really rocked my boat, is what I would say. I actually had a look at the first portrait I made, and it was a very dull day, and I was shooting on a 5.4 camera, and it was just so dark indoors that I was going to have to get into some major sort of lighting scenario. And I don't really like to do that. I'm happy to use lighting as a kind of fill-in, if you know what I mean, but not as the thing. And I needed to have, you know, a reason, you know, because when you're shooting on 5.4, if you're shooting on a very wide aperture, it's incredibly difficult to get people in focus. And I had this notion that people really needed to be as sharp as I could get them, because I wanted people to be able to, I mean, you know, that thing about photography, you know, the thing about a photograph is that, you know, it may be just a fleeting moment, but you can look at it for ages and ages and ages in a way that you can't a film. You know, you can't scrutinize something on a screen in the same way that you can scrutinize. I mean, I'm sure technology is moving and everything like that forward in that regard, but I don't think you can look at a screen in the same where the image is moving in the same way as you can look at a still image. And there's that thing about really being drawn in to look carefully at people, to look at the connections between them. And so I think it suits photography really well. I think because I've made some films of, you know, I did a series called Classroom Portraits as well, where I photographed classes of school children around the world. And I did make some videos of that. And I really love the videos that I made of the classroom portraits, but they are really more about the process of being photographed than the image itself, if you get my meaning.
There's one thing about this, you want to just say, Julian, something about this picture, especially when you describe it as the second picture you've done in this series, that it almost made me suspicious when I first saw it, because it's so perfect. Like every detail about this picture, starting with the resemblance of all of the different generations. It's as if you've found them in some casting website.
It is just the nature of the thing. I mean, it's only on very rare occasions have I seen even a snapshot photo of people before I meet them. It's, you know, I mean, I just have a rule that if there are 4 generations, and if I've cleared that they understand exactly what I mean by 4 generations, that they have to be a direct line of descent, I will photograph any 4 or 5 generations family. I don't say I'm not going to photograph you because one of you's ugly or looks boring or anything like that. I just will photograph those families. I will record that 4 or 5 generation family, and I always arrange to meet wherever it's most convenient for the family to meet, because it's often not convenient for families to meet and get together. And quite often it's all to do with what's easiest for the most elderly person in the photograph.
I should probably give the caption to the picture, which is Jack Potter 2, Stuart Potter 35, Michael Potter 60, and Harry Potter 86.
Yeah, the title of the photograph is just the name and the age of each of the people in the picture. That's the title of it. Yeah, but I mean, but these people, I mean, I didn't tell them what to wear. They didn't ask me what to wear. I mean, it was very interesting. They just, by coincidence, I mean, when I arrived at the house, was the dad's house, and it was only him and his son there when I arrived. 10 minutes later, his father arrived in his car, also wearing a blue shirt but with a tie. And 10 minutes after that, his father arrived in a taxi, also wearing a blue shirt, also wearing a tie, but with a waistcoat and a pocket watch. And yeah, I mean, it is almost too good to be true. And if I had set it up, I guess I'd be very happy that, that I've been so smart as to, well, I mean, I wouldn't have trusted myself to set it up, to be honest with you. So yeah, things just happen. I never quite know how the family will be.
Did you choose the blank background?
Well, it was just a very, very bare house, you know, and so they didn't have a single picture on the wall. And so that was the way it was. And
this next picture is Diana Larmuth, 94, Rosemary Sawyer, 69, Sarah Sawyer, 38, and Sophie Sawyer, 4.
Yeah.
So this is very contrasting with the previous picture in terms of the amount of information that's in the background.
Yes. I mean, it of course, this is the space belonging to Diana. And yes, I mean, that says so much about her. You know, you can see that she's an upper middle class lady of good stock, but you can also see her history around her. You know, there isn't a single color picture in the on the wall. She comes from a black and white world, and the names are interesting, aren't they? They just tell a little story that that we know the mum with the child isn't married, for example, because she has the same surname as her mum, or she's kept her name. We don't know. Names have become a little bit more confusing, but there are other lines of women in the archive where there are 4 women with different surnames and a child with the same surname as her mum.
What's it like for you trying to work out how to arrange people and arrange the background?
Well, I mean, it's always, you know, I arrive at a house. I usually, sometimes there's literally only one possibility because I need a certain amount of space to fit people in. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a, yeah, you're looking for a situation where people can be and where it can look right for them to be there, you know. And sometimes you've got to have somebody sitting down. Very often very often the most elderly person in the picture needs to be sitting down, not always. Yeah, I don't really think there's a formula as such. I mean, what can be problematic is that you sort of see something, but what a space looks like, and then when you put people into it, sorry, that was my mum. But then when people go into that space, they can obscure everything, you know. So there is, if you decide that you like certain things in the picture, you have to be careful about either asking people to move a little bit to the left or the right. It's difficult to keep your eye on things sometimes, but I quite like there to be there isn't in this picture, but there are quite a lot of pictures where there is a clock, which I like. There are some pictures where there is not only the clock, but the date. You know what I mean? It tells you the day and the date, and I quite like to see those sorts of things, and also just, I don't know. I mean, the chronology of it is straightforward. I always photograph them in chronological order, but I have the freedom to have it can go either from left to right or from right to left. So that, but sometimes the space kind of dictates that, because you might need a comfortable chair. In this case, I couldn't have had Diana on the right hand side, for example. And so, yeah, it's like all these elements are involved. And I mean, looking at it now, I'm a bit anxious that Diana's got something sitting on her head on the on the cabinet at the back, which I yeah, I mean, so yes, there is a lot going on. And also, I mean, in this case not so much, because the child here is I think, how old is the child again? I can't read it on the bottom.
Four.
She's 4. So she's a bit older, and usually a 4-year-old is fine. But if you have younger children in the picture, they can be, you know, very they can be the punctum, but in not necessarily a good way.
So just looking at this next picture, there's something very striking about the way, a bit like the Potter family, that they are all behaving in a very similar fashion. How much was this your direction, and how much did they just do it? This
is, I would say, it's kind of the circumstances. As I recall, I mean, that sofa just dominated everything. That was what there was. Everybody had to sit on a sofa in that house. That sofa went all the way along and round the corner, and I'm sort of like up against a similar chair on the other side. So I could maybe have positioned them in the corner, but I think I probably quite liked the window in the background, and the light hanging down from the ceiling in the next room. But what's quite nice about this one is that because they're all, I mean, it's not usually how I do things, but they're all at the same level. I mean, he's quite an, you know, he's a teenager. He's 15 or 16 or something, isn't he?
16, yeah.
Yeah, and they are all pretty much the same size, and so they line up side by side. All of their, you know, there's hardly a difference in scale between them, which is a little bit unusual for these portraits, because very often the old person is tiny, and so they're all the same. So it's quite interesting how the grandfather is the most distinctive. The others look more alike in a way, don't they? And I very much like the way great-granddad's hair and great-grandson's hair sort of mirror each other. So, you know, he's only got 12.5% of his great-granddad's genes, and yet you can directly see the connection between them, can't you?
Do they see the pictures the same way you do? Do you find when you show them to them later?
I'm not sure exactly, but I think they certainly understand what I'm looking for. I don't go into this sort of suggesting that they're going to get a nice family picture, because apart from anything else, you know, it's a very different, it's very different to a family picture, because it actually cuts out most of the family. You know, there are lots of examples where there are several siblings, where there are aunts and uncles, and where the great grandparent, actually you could do a big family with, like, you could do a big picture of like 25 people on it, of it leading down to all of the great grandchildren, you know. But I focus on a single line, and so they know I'm looking for something particular, and they know that something is connected to existential questions, frankly, about where we come from, and where, if we have kids, we're going, you know, biologically. And so for me, I think it's a beautiful notion, but it's also you know, quite serious. You know, it is not a project about happy families. you know, for me. And well, and people can see that. I think people can see that, you know. I quite typically tell people, and I did this with my classroom portraits as well, you know, I tell people that I'm not interested in making a flattering picture of them. I said I'm equally not interested in making an unflattering picture. I just want to see what you look like, you know. And so, to be honest with you, it's somewhere between a passport photo and a portrait, if you know what I mean. It's a bit more than a passport photo, but it's yeah. And so really, it's so people just, and people need to be still, because I still, you know, you know, it's only a fraction of a second, but it's a quarter of a second or half a second sometimes, you know. Not so much these days now that I'm working digitally, but people do need to be ready. And I quite like that moment of me being ready and of them being ready, and then trying to get us all ready at the same moment is what my job is, I think.
Particularly so if you've got a very small person in a police car.
Yeah, you have to do as you're told when you've got the police involved. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, when you
mentioned before the difficulty of corralling small children into this. So what happened in this to get the police car involved?
Well, I mean, on this occasion, there were 2 portraits to be made, because that's Peggy Stanley, I think, on the left-hand side, and that's Lewis, and Lewis's mum, I think, Nicola. But Nicola's brother also has a son, and this is Nicola's house. And so in a way, I think the reason why this portrait is better than the one of her brother and his son is because it's more authentically kind of somebody's house. I mean, there is another portrait of Nicola's brother and his son, but the reality is that nobody in that picture actually lives in that house. So I felt a bit more uncomfortable about it. But nevertheless, it's worth doing when you've got little children, because, like I say, you know, the chances of not getting a good portrait with a small child that maybe just doesn't want to be photographed, yeah, they can really dominate the situation, and then it becomes very difficult for the adults to concentrate. And so in those situations, I'm trying to persuade the adults not to worry about the child and to concentrate on being photographed, and to let the child just go. And equally, I will, to be honest, sometimes use, you know, I'm sure, I mean, I don't know if anybody's been a baby photographer or a small child photographer, but little toys on the top of the camera, you know, anything to try and get the child's attention, just to get them to look at the camera. And I actually used his cousin, because his cousin is a year older than him. And his cousin actually pressed the shutter with me. So he was standing with me, camera's in quite a low position, and his cousin's looking through the camera with me, and we're shooting the camera. And so Lewis was got engaged through me using his cousin to make the picture. And so, yeah, I mean, he's really engaged with the camera, which is what you want, I think. I mean, I really want everybody in the picture if possible. I mean, there are some pictures where I've got some pictures where babies are asleep, for example, which is, I think, kind of okay. But where possible, I want people to be engaged. There is another picture, actually, where there's 2 newborn twins. And one of those twins is asleep, but one of them, it's only 7 days old, but this little boy is looking straight into the camera, and it looks amazing when you imagine that little boy who's 7 days old won't be able to see the camera. As far as we understand, newborn babies can't, so everything's like what you can see behind me probably, and they don't really see color, I think, in those early days. But he's opened his eyes and he's looking straight into the lens, which is a kind of great thing to happen.
What was different about doing the project in Birmingham and the Black Country as against Bradford or wherever you'd done the pictures before?
Well, it was in a way it was a little bit similar to Bradford, but I was working in Bradford in 2004 and 2005, and in the immigrant community there were, well, I didn't find any Asian families, for example, in Bradford with 4 generations. But I found families with 4 generations, but not 4 generations in the UK. And so that collection from Bradford was a little bit monocultural. But here we are, 18 years later or whatever it is, in Birmingham, and of course that's there's another generation come through in those intervening years, and so yeah, I was able to. I was working in Birmingham from the first weekend in December last year until I think the first weekend, or the last weekend in April this year, and I was able to find 29 families in Birmingham and the Black Country, and several of those families are Black and Asian and mixed ethnic group families, and yeah, about half of them are indigenous and white families. So yeah, a different crowd of people, and it was just great to after all these years, because hitherto in the intervening years between Bradford and Birmingham, I've probably been making 2 portraits a year, something like that. It's a case of it's when families get in touch with me or when somebody hears about the project or whatever, but obviously with Grain and Multi-Story and their sort of social media connections, and with the Commonwealth Games Festival being on board, there was quite a lot of publicity, and we had over 100 families approach us, and a lot of them, as proved impossible to get them together and to get the appointments made. But we photographed 29 families in a very short space of time, and yes, and I suppose you get into a bit of a rhythm.
You seem to have broken your own rules here by including a 5th person reflected in the mirror.
Yes, I also did with those twins as well. So there were a couple of occasions where it was just too nice an opportunity to miss. And of course there have been mirrors on other occasions, but never a mirror quite as appealing as that one. And Winston, who is in the mirror, because I also photographed Winston instead of his wife Linda. So there's another portrait of Winston sitting there instead of Linda. Although I didn't have the idea of putting Linda in the mirror at that time, but it was just that I photographed Linda second, and Winston was there, and so I asked him to stay there, and it's nice. I mean, it just adds to the flavour of a portrait which is very much mixed race. I mean, Winston's Jamaican, Linda's English, and their daughter, I've forgotten her name now, she's obviously
Chloe.
Product of Chloe, yeah. And then Chloe's partner was a black guy, but his partner is a white girl, a white woman, and so it is a very, very much a mixed culture family. but you can just see how, I mean, it's nice that they've got, it says family on the wall in the background, doesn't it? In that picture frame.
So do you think of yourself as telling a story of the families that you're photographing?
Well, I mean, I think it's, I hope that the photographs draw you in to think about those things. I mean, you know, I obviously, when I show these pictures, I don't tell stories about them like I am here. You know, but then on the other hand, in this situation, people don't have a print in a frame on the wall to study, to explore in the same way that they would be able to in that context. So hopefully there's enough to draw people in to really look at and think about all of those things. And also, I think it inevitably reflects back on yourself when you look at this work, because, you know, we all share, you know, we're all human, and we all, even if we don't know who our parents are, they must have existed. I mean, maybe that will change with science and technology and genetic engineering and what have you, but I think, I hope that the work draws you in enough so that you don't need the stories that I tell behind the pictures, so that you're sort of drawn into thinking what might have happened, or who the dad might be, or who the mum might be, or whatever.
This is, as we were saying when I was talking to Trish, this idea of looking at generations is inevitably gives intimations of mortality. You can't help thinking about people aging and death. Was it a positive experience? Do you think it's a positive experience to look at things in that way?
Well, the way that I've done it, yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, people are, I mean, I had several conversations with families about how old people are. Many of the old people themselves talk about the fact that they're going to fall off the edge of this conveyor belt in the not too distant future. But you know what, it's like, all, you know, I like this thing about these photographs are all just a single fraction of a second, and there's so much time encapsulated within them, and yeah, and all these lives. I mean, of course, there's lots of combination of times as well, because obviously the only person that has been alive when the others weren't alive is the oldest person in the picture. So they've shared history, but of course led separate lives within that. But it's also, then you're thinking about the future. So I like, you know, because there's this thing with photography, it's always rooted in the past, isn't it? You know, as soon as you press the shutter, the moment's gone and it's in the past. But actually, I hope these pictures sort of like make you maybe think about the future as well. And that's what my classroom portraits were about as well. I mean, in fact, the exhibition of classroom portraits was called "The Future is Ours," as a reference to thinking, you know, basically as a reference to adults taking responsibility for the world that kids are growing up into. And these maybe enter into that same conversation as well. You know, and you talk to any parent, actually, and you say to them, you know, we need to think about the world they're growing up into, and they get it.
Great, that's a great place to end, I think. Thanks very much, Julian, and thanks very much to Trish. We have a little bit of time. If anybody wants to ask any questions, then maybe we have a couple of minutes in which we can do that. You could either raise your hand through the miracle of the facilities on Zoom, or you could write a question in the chat section, and my colleague will probably see them there. Where is the work? Can you maybe tell us, first of all, Julian, where the work can be seen?
It's on in public spaces in Birmingham at the moment. So it's on billboards. If you go to the Germain Photographic Hub website, I think they have a list of where posters are, so you can do a sort of guided tour around the semi-industrial parts of Birmingham, and so they're huge. So it's not in a gallery, but actually, if you were to go to the Germain site as well, Annabelle French has written a nice piece there on the Germain site. I think I've got a link in my Instagram feed to go directly to that essay. It's a really nice essay. And so they're on at New Street Station as well. I mean, they're sort of scattered around the station. Nearly all of the portraits are there. Some of them had to be taken down because of the sheer numbers of people visiting the Commonwealth Games. So it's public space, basically, for the time being.
Have you been with any of the people in the pictures to see their billboard?
Well, I'll tell you what, there are some fantastic pictures the families have sent in of them standing in front of their pictures, and at some point there'll be an Instagram post. I mean, I think Stephen Burke, who's been the producer on the project, has done a great job of collecting that stuff together. It's been sort of flooding in. I haven't really got it organized yet, but there are some really nice pictures, and it's very touching how actually I mean, I have only had one family throughout the entire history of the project who has actually expressed their dislike of one of these portraits. And you know, because they're not flattering, like I really don't think they are flattering, you know, but people take it seriously because they understand that I'm taking it seriously and that I think it's important, and I think they get it, you know. So yeah, there will be somewhere some lovely pictures of people grinning like Cheshire cats in front of their portraits. Yeah.
So I should mention that the work appears in the magazine with an interview you did with Josh Allen, which gives a more in-depth view of the genesis of the work, and I think that would be a very interesting way for people to get a bit of the background, more than we've had time to talk about this evening. And do you think the pictures will appear in a book at some stage, or?
Yes, I'm going to start working on a book. I don't have a publisher as of yet, but I am going to start working on a book. And actually, I mean, one of the things I did in Birmingham was do some extra bits and pieces with some family photographs. Which was something that I wouldn't have done but for the fact that the posters didn't really fit the format of my pictures, and so I decided that the space had to be, you know, I couldn't have loads of white space everywhere on these posters, and so you know, I took the risk of digging in people's family albums, because you know, it was just something I did a lot, you know, back in the early days of my career when I did steelworks and stuff like that. And but what was very unusual in the late 1980s is now very commonplace. So I was very anxious about using family pictures, but actually it's hard not to be really touched when you see another layer of time placed alongside the portraits that I've made. So on the billboards that are in Birmingham, you will see some pictures where you see another snapshot from the past. But interestingly, what I can do now is go back to some of the families that I photographed in 2004, 2005, 2010, 2011, and I can maybe get some pictures that have been made since my portrait. So that flow of time and snapshots and my portraits can go back and forth maybe. So that might be quite interesting to play with in terms of a book. But I think I would be very, but I don't think scatter the book with loads of snapshot photography, but it could be a very nice way maybe to break up perhaps the monotony of turning page after page of family photographs with people looking at you. Nice to have a picture maybe of a kid on a swing or something at some point to break it up.
Did you, yes, I'm going to get this wrong now, but did you do Soccer Wonderland at Impressions Gallery?
Yes.
I was just thinking a perfect segue there to connect the fact that your work has been supported by Impressions, just in exactly the same way that Trish mentioned that her work had been supported by Impressions as well. Yeah,
that was in the Paul Womble days of Impressions Gallery, but in Soccer Wonderland was shown at the Photographers Gallery, and then it was shown at Impressions Gallery. And yes, I'm actually, funnily enough, just working with my old friend Andy Altman, who designed the book in Soccer Wonderland. We're just doing a book of Sabutio superheroes to cheer us up.
Right. Okay, well,
in these dark, miserable times, we need Sabutio superheroes.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Julian. And I would refer people to the magazine if you want to see more of Trish's work and Julian's work, and read my interview with Trish, and see Josh Allen's interview with Julian. The magazine should be available very soon. Come through your letterbox if you're a subscriber, or if you want to buy this individual issue, which you can do from our website, or if you go to a photography gallery or a specialist bookshop, then you'll have the chance to buy a copy there very soon. Thank you very much to Julian and Trish for speaking to us tonight. Very enjoyable talks. We've been recording this, so we will post it online soon. And I hope to see you again at the time of our next